Hi everyone, welcome. We're over here on my computer, a place where we sometimes make a quick little pit stop to check in on my tracking spreadsheet before heading down to the wormery. I just wanted to share with you a little bit of information about the system we're going to be checking in on today. It's been 24 days now since we introduced a little frozen mini pumpkin into my VermiBag Mini, where we've got some red wigglers living, and it's a pretty well-populated system. As you can see, the estimated number of worms living in that system exceeds 3,100 worms. And over the past 3.5 weeks, the worms have been working on a little treat that we gave them, which, as I mentioned earlier, was the frozen mini pumpkin. This is one of the very early frames, shortly after the pumpkin had been placed into the bag. And there was a point in time where we've already removed images from the camera. So let me switch over to the specific document that I created for tracking this particular time lapse. You can see I follow a sort of standard format where the overall count of how many images have been taken is tallied up here up until the current date. The highlight though was this point over here on day 10 when I noticed that some of the lights had burned out. A little bit of an upsetting point in time where I thought that, oh my goodness, what do we do now? I didn't really do much other than stop the camera, insert some additional lights, and then restart the camera. And then a couple days later I decided, well, I'm really curious to see what that little hiccup in there might result in terms of the footage. So after 13 days I removed over 18,000 individual images taken at an interval of 1 minute per image, and I started playing around with that footage to come up with this little short clip here. It is actually, you know, the time lapse of those first 13 days, but for the past 11 days now the system has continued, and from what I could tell, not much has changed. There was a little additional thing here on day 18. So for the past 6 days, the entire system was moved over a couple feet to position it directly underneath a little tiny leak coming out of a pipe from overhead to dampen the pumpkin, which to me appeared like it was getting pretty dry. But it does seem to me like nothing's really changed, so I think today's going to be the day we're going to stop the time lapse, feed the worms traditionally, give them a nice hearty feeding, and that's where we're going now. So let's head on down to the wormery and get this job started. So I'm wearing an orange shirt because the pumpkin is the main event here, although it doesn't really resemble a pumpkin much anymore as far as its color goes. It's got kind of a gray appearance to it, and the worms have definitely done a number on it. They've pretty much eaten it, and it's been sitting there drying a little bit, and there's a little tiny spot over there where you can actually see where the drip from above has been kind of puncturing the skin of the pumpkin, but I don't think it really resulted in any sort of a worm frenzy like I thought it might by the moisture showing up over there. So I've pretty much decided it's time to bring this to an end. So my little remote control app here on this smartphone has been sitting here waiting for me to just hit that button and bring it into the filming, and I think we're going to do that now. So there we go. You might have heard the little beeping in the background. What's really going on over there is the little view window. It's too dark to see, but there's a little view window on the side of the bag through which the camera is peering to get that view that you noticed earlier. But I think the time has come to unplug all this stuff and disassemble a little bit so that I can more easily move it over into the wormery, and then we'll pick up on just treating this like another worm system and getting it fed. So we'll take a pause and we'll regroup in the wormery with the VermiBag Mini and take care of getting them fed. So let's get that started. As you can see, we're being quite generous with the feeding today. There's not only 1 but 2 days worth of coffee in here. All kinds of stuff used to make a salad, and down at the bottom of the pile, minus the pit, is an entire peach. So I think they're going to appreciate getting this big mound of food piled in after having only this to eat for the past 24 days. Now, if it had not been for that one drop of water landing right there, breaking its way through the material, this thing would be as dry as a, I don't even know what to use. What's a good thing to describe something that's really dry? You know, and when something gets really dry, like this opposite end of it that was not getting dripped on over here, the worms don't really have much that they can do with it, so it just ends up sitting there. It doesn't mean we're going to throw it away. It means we're just going to include it with the feeding and get it into a space where it's going to get nice and hydrated through and through again, and then have an opportunity to finally get eaten by the worms. And now, added to our already pretty huge collection of pumpkin stems that are part of this system. Oops, what did I just break there? Oh, I think I just broke a piece of a pumpkin stem. Something I try not to do typically, but you're going to find, there it is, pretty huge pumpkin stem. I believe this is the biggest one of them all. And I guess why I broke that was because a part of it, one of these large little star-like protrusions, was so big that it just sort of stuck through the surface there. I had trouble submerging the entire thing. But we don't even only have just this one pumpkin stem. We've got another one right here. I'm trying to remember now. There must have been about 5 or 6, if not more of them, right? Another one here. Because, you know, when we built this system, we dumped out the contents of a few, how many was it? 4 buckets that had been going for quite some time. I believe they ran for exactly 6 months when we decided it was time to get the worms working on something a little bit more serious, get them out of those buckets, and we released them into here. And then each bucket had 2 stems in it, I think with the exception of the bucket in which the largest of the stems was. There we had only 1 stem, but every other bucket had a couple stems in it. So it was just sort of a novelty to have those pumpkin stems in there, and man, there's some pretty dry material here and there. So I'm really looking forward to getting some dampness down into this system. Wow, even as I go down deeper, a lot drier than I had expected it to be. You know, once upon a time when I used to run this bag previously, I did so in such a way that the outer edge of well, it's a bag, right? So the fabric material on the opposite side, I had placed bubble wrap all the way around to, I guess, prevent the loss of moisture. I assume that the bubble wrap was not really stifling the breathability of the material, but I believe it was managing to reduce the amount of moisture lost from the system through evaporation out the sides of the system, through the sides of the fabric container. And I'm starting to wonder if I might have to reinstitute a similar setup to keep the system's moisture from leaving through the sides of the container. From what I remember, this material was a little bit more damp than what it feels like to me now. And I really wanted to try to just get out of the habit of probing so deep into this thing and just leave the lower reaches of the material in the system to be. Because what we took out of those buckets was thought to be pretty much finished compost for the most part. And that whatever time would be spent in this bag, that material would just become that much finer, so that at some point when we get around to harvesting castings out of this system through the harvesting panel on the bottom, we would have a whole bunch of really well worked vermicompost. So, well, I think we've done about the best we can do in terms of creating an excavated hole here without it having constantly flow back in. I guess maybe I'm just not utilizing some of the space over here that I could be using. Alright, yeah, I'm just going to sort of pile on top of some of the leftover foods, the corn cobs we bumped into, some of those old pumpkin stems, the pumpkin skin itself too over there. We'll be sure to get all that stuff right back into service. And I got a feeling that this, yeah, I think it will. This includes that whole peach, some tomatoes, a good number of things that are going to bring with them some nice moisture. Perhaps no moisture or very little coming from the coffee, but still a feeding that I believe will bring with it a good bit of moisture. But you know what? I want to bring some of my prepared moist bedding in here too. On my way to grab the bedding, I really got to thinking about moisture, so it reminded me that we're going to need our plastic cover back so that the system stops losing moisture through evaporation through the top surface. And on the same topic of moisture, I also thought that it might be a good idea to bring in our spray nozzle. And then when I started thinking about my original reason for why I stepped aside to get the bedding, I started to wonder, is piling a whole bunch of unbroken down fresh bedding down in that hole the best idea? I started to think about how other people run these systems, how they just pile the new stuff on the top surface, cover that with bedding. And the bedding in almost all cases that I've seen is applied at the very end. Kind of makes sense if you don't want to be contaminating the nice castings that you plan on harvesting sometime soon from the bottom. It doesn't make a lot of sense to be blending in all kinds of stuff that's going to need a bunch of time to break down. So I figured maybe now would be a good time to deviate a little bit from the game plan, which I was going to just apply bedding, add food, kind of treat it the way I feed all my bins and buckets and traditional containers. But in this flow-through system, I really started feeling like I'm meddling with the stuff that I shouldn't be meddling too much about, the stuff at the bottom. I mean, it felt good to be able to verify that things are okay down there, the worms are hanging out down there, but it's borderline, you know. So instead of putting a whole bunch of bedding down there, my thought was to simply add moisture, and perhaps a good bit of it as well. And I think the complementary action to what I'm doing here now, which is trying to compensate for lost moisture, is to prevent further loss of moisture out through the side. So I'm going to have to start thinking about some sort of a covering for the outside of this bag so that it helps hang on to its moisture. And I think in future feedings I'm going to do a little bit more to try to mimic what I see other people running these flow-through systems do, which is to just lay the new foods out on top. So and the bedding that we're going to be adding too. So it seemed to me like preserving all this stuff that we excavated, all this pumpkin from the time-lapse, all these corn cobs and pumpkin stems from the very beginning, I guess. Let's hold off on putting that stuff so low, and let's come back with some of the stuff we pulled out originally. And then as we pile that stuff in, which in my judgment, it just seems like it's really dry, some of it. I mean, some of this stuff here, I'll see if I can, right there, I think some of that stuff that I just brushed in, which is almost all of it, was stuff which to me seemed like it could use even a little bit more moisture. So let's add yet another spray into that material that we just backfilled with. And I can see that I've already started losing some of my big objects here. Perhaps if we could just backfill this hole a little bit more using some of this loose stuff that's lingering around over here, then we might be able to have enough of a height relative to the top surface where we can start putting, active composting stuff back in. But perhaps doing what we can to avoid going any deeper. So let's start bringing back all this stuff. Now we get a good view of what all we have down here as far as pumpkin stems, and there's a bunch of them, right? Well, these are pumpkin stems. Not to mention this really big, huge one that we've always attempted to try to keep submerged and surrounded by the bin's materials, providing access from all directions to come work on the lovely pumpkin stems. And now the leftovers of the pumpkin can go right there too. And the new pumpkin stem, brand new stem, to do a little bit of catching up relative to all the other pumpkin stems that have had a huge jump start on their breakdown process. So, let's see. I don't think there's any other large objects that we excavated along the way, so that's pretty good that we're able to submerge this stuff, but not too deep. See, like this stuff here, this is even what used to be what came prior to the circular piece of plastic that we're going to be covering up with. We're using a sort of circular or perhaps square-shaped piece of cardboard as the top covering there too. Not getting the job done as far as we were concerned, as far as hanging on to the system's moisture, and it turned into supplementary bedding, and now it just sits down in the bin getting nibbled up as food. So I'm trying to be as sensible as I can be with this system to keep it productive, keep the worms healthy. And I gotta tell you, when I was watching those poor little worms squirming in that dry material, I was almost, I don't know, maybe it's because I just recently watched that film, Total Recall, the original Arnold Schwarzenegger version of it, if you know what I'm talking about. There's a section on the planet Mars. It plays in the future, so Mars is colonized. And there's the evil overlord, kind of administrator of the facility. I think his name was Cohagen. Does that sound right? Well, you Total Recall fans can correct me if I'm mistaken with that. And he's sort of in control of the oxygen supply, and there's like a group of misfit. I think, what is it? It's like a mutant city. No, not X-Men mutants. I guess mutants from maybe radioactivity. I don't know why there's this huge mutant population, but they've got enough of them, and some of them are really weird. So we've also got my pulverized eggshell here, which we're going to include as grit for this feeding. And now I think we could finally turn to the stuff that I stepped away for a moment ago, which was the bedding. Nice moist bedding. Container's even a little more heavy than it normally is right now. And I think it's because I mixed this stuff with a bit more moisture than I usually do, which is also a good beneficial thing, I believe, here. Any moisture, I think, is going to help this system get back on its feet after sitting out here for 24 days doing this time lapse with this little mini pumpkin. And I got to admit, moisture was always a big concern for me. The big huge surface like this, just exposed to the air, permitting a good bit of drying if that's what it has the opportunity to do. So it's going to feel good getting all this moisture in here. I mean, it feels good already to me to have had a chance to come back in here and sort of set things straight for these little worms and try to improve their space. I'm definitely interested in seeing how the time lapse turned out, but it makes me wonder how I could possibly do it better in the future in such a way that the worms remain, you know, a little bit better hydrated than they were in this instance. So I've got some ideas for that. So maybe, who knows, maybe we'll have this system back in action using the plastic portal side viewer window here to film another one, because I kind of like that low perspective. It's kind of interesting. What else do we have here? Feeding zone indicators, plenty of bedding, plenty of moisture, a nice healthy portion of food, and a little shot of moisture that they're going to appreciate, and a little protection here on the top surface to keep that moisture in the system. And a little bit of homework to think about maybe protecting the sides of the system. Otherwise, it's going to have to be, you know, moistening the way we just did here today, which isn't that bad. It's an option. We're coming in here regular anyway, so we'll see. We'll play it by ear. But that's it for the video, everyone. I've just got a couple things to take care of getting cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before you go, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.